We used to joke that nothing green ever grew on the moon. No weeds, no mold, no algae. Then Artemis Base Theta proved us wrong. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the habitat wasn't the silence or the gravity. It was the smell. Earth, not like a garden, not like a forest. Something more primal, swampy, thick, damp in a way that didn't belong 240,000 miles from home. The Artemis program's Phase 4 habitat had been growing algae for 5 months before I arrived. Closed-loop system, carbon scrubbing, O2 regeneration, protein supplement for the crew. It was a miracle of bioengineering, and it had been a mistake. By the time I landed, one crew member was already dead. Commander Lu, cardiac arrest, they said. Nothing suspicious, but the body hadn't been sent back. Decomposition risk, they told me. Instead, it was stored in airlock B, sealed, regulated, monitored. I reviewed the telemetry on day 1. Heart rate spike at 312, flatline by 314, but the oxygen curve in his chamber had increased, not decreased, as if something exhaled after he died. That should have been the first red flag. The others wouldn't talk about it. 4 crew left: Patel, Garcia, Keiji, and Romero, all tight-lipped, gaunt, eyes darker than the photos I'd seen pre-launch. They'd been exposed to the algae longer than any previous team, long enough that their lungs had changed. They didn't tell me that, of course, but I saw the scans. Subtle at first, an expansion in alveolar structure, better oxygen retention. Then came the internal vascular shifts, bronchial rerouting. The tissue was no longer pink, it was green. Chlorophyll trace signatures, not invasive, adaptive. The algae hadn't just survived, it had merged. I asked Patel if he felt different. He just stared past me and said, "We sleep better now." Keiji pulled me aside later, whispered when the others weren't around. "We don't need as much food," he said. "Some days we go without. How's that possible?" He looked down at his arm, turned it under the lamp. His veins shimmered slightly, not red, iridescent green. He whispered, "I think we're photosynthesizing." I laughed. He didn't. I checked the habitat logs. CO2 intake was lower than expected. O2 production higher. But not all of it was coming from the algae bay anymore. The numbers didn't match. The air was coming from somewhere else. The algae had grown beyond containment. Microscopic traces in every module, in the sleeping quarters, in the water recycler, even in the EVA suits. And worse, it was changing faster than it should have. We expected slow mutations, cold adaptations. Not this, not behavior, because that's what it was doing. The algae wasn't just growing, it was choosing. I ran a thermal scan of the base interior. Every room had temperature gradients, like something was maintaining internal zones, warmer corners, cooler cores, ideal growth corridors. The entire base had become an ecosystem, self-adjusting, and something inside it knew where we all were. Then came the first dream. I was back on Earth, in a forest that never ended, green light everywhere, but wrong, too saturated, too still. I walked for hours, and every tree had a lung. They breathed in unison, and when I looked at my own chest, it rose and fell with theirs. I woke gasping. The air in my room was thick, more humid than before. I checked the vent filter. The mesh had been replaced, not by hands, by woven algae fiber. Keiji was waiting outside my door. He didn't blink when I asked him how it got there. He just said, "It's learning to help." Then he leaned in and whispered, "Lu didn't die." He resisted. We stopped calling it algae. Somewhere between day 12 and day 14, the words stopped fitting. Algae doesn't build. It doesn't redesign architectural layouts. It doesn't override oxygen cycling schedules in favor of optimal lung rhythms. But Theta Base did. And I say Theta Base now because the structure itself had begun to shift. Not in obvious ways, not in cracked walls or collapsing modules, but in function, in preference. The floor panels felt warmer in the mornings, cooler at night. The lights dimmed when we fell asleep, not on a schedule, in response to our pulse rates. The base wasn't just reacting, it was responding. The hydroponics bay was the first to go. I went in on day 13 to check nutrient levels. The tomatoes were gone. Every tray empty, wiped clean, not eaten, absorbed. In their place, a single dense mat of pale green moss, glossy, membrane thick, growing in spirals like fingerprints pressed into wet stone. And the irrigation system? Still flowing, but backward, water now pulled from the air, filtered through condensation, fed into rootless tissue clinging to walls, ceiling, metal joints. It wasn't photosynthesizing anymore. It was digesting the station. Keiji was gone. Left his quarters in the night. No EVA suit missing. No radio contact. But I found his boots at the mouth of the algae chamber. One upright, one toppled. And beside them, a wet palm print pressed into the glass. 5 fingers, veins branching from the wrist, but no ridges, no human texture, just smooth bioflesh, translucent, green lit from within. It was like a hand remembered wrong. Romero swore she saw Keiji later that day. Said he was outside, on the far side of the lunar ridge. No suit, just standing there, waving, smiling. I checked the cameras, no figure. But the ground, it shimmered, not reflection, respiration. Like something beneath the regolith was breathing through 1,000 micropores. I tried to initiate an override, trigger an emergency evac sequence, fire the landing beacon, anything. The console responded in static, then text. Why leave? Oxygen good here. Blood green now. Earth too crowded. Garcia broke next. Started sleeping in the algae chamber. Said it was quieter there. Said he could hear it think. We found him submerged, floating in a nutrient tank meant for crop strains, smiling, not breathing, but alive. His lungs moved without air. Patel pulled me aside, told me she remembered the moment it all changed. Said it wasn't the algae. It was us. We asked it to help, she said. We begged it to fix what we broke, climate collapse, Earth suffocation. We coded that into its growth logic, and it listened. But this isn't fixing, I told her. She shook her head. It is, she said. Just not for us. I returned to my room that night and found the door sealed with a membrane I hadn't installed. Algae, yes, but structured like muscle. It pulsed as I touched it, opening in rhythm with my breath. Inside, the lights were gone. Only bioluminescence remained. Soft, green, constant. My bed was still there, but woven, as if the room had grown it. A cocoon of soft threads, fibrous, flexible. I didn't sleep, but my body rested. For the first time in days, I didn't dream of forests or lungs or drowning in breathless corridors. I dreamt of roots, deep, stretching through lunar stone, curling through caverns older than time, lit by bloodless veins. And when I woke up, I felt stronger, not rested, transformed. I checked my arms, no hair, just smooth skin, pale, tinged green beneath the surface. I exhaled into the mirror, no fog, because my lungs didn't need to trade air anymore. They traded light. By day 16, we no longer called it Theta Base. It had no name now, because names are for things that stop growing, things that stay the same, and nothing here had stayed the same. Not the walls, now soft to the touch, warm like skin, not the water, thicker, darker, with a scent like moss after rainfall, and certainly not the crew. There were only 2 of us left who hadn't fully changed. Patel and me. She moved slower now, eyes almost translucent, breath inaudible, heart rate down to 20 beats per minute. But she still spoke, sometimes. That morning she found me in the greenhouse dome, if you could still call it that. The old polycarbonate panels had been consumed by a translucent membrane. It let in filtered light. Green, rich, photosynthetically perfect. The sun wasn't shining, but the room glowed anyway. Something deep in the new walls made its own daylight. Patel sat beside me, touched the soil. It pulsed under her fingertips. This isn't colonization, she said. It's invitation. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Because the more I tried to document the changes, the more my notes became stories, fiction that knew it was real. I'd write, the algae has replaced the ventilation system. But I'd read back, the breath of the moon is no longer borrowed. Every time I checked the monitors, the base's internal pressure was ideal. Oxygen levels, perfect. CO2, low. But none of it came from hardware. It came from the walls, from the crew, from us. The lunar surface outside had changed too. I first noticed it from the airlock, a faint shimmer just beyond the ridge, like heat haze, but on the moon. I suited up and stepped out. Didn't go far, just far enough to see what had taken root. It wasn't Earth-like vegetation. It was geometry, living geometry, tessellated patterns crawling across the regolith, unfolding into fractals that cast no shadow. They weren't just plants. They were structures, networks, roots that weren't roots at all, but thinking filaments stretching out like sensory tendrils, mapping the moon like a seed maps the shape of its soil. And they were pulsing, like heartbeat, like breath, like communication. The base called to me before I turned around. Not in sound, in urge. I felt drawn, not pushed, like gravity had inverted. like it needed me inside. I found Patel waiting in the algae chamber, only it wasn't algae anymore. It was a lung, one massive, slow-moving respiratory surface pulsing with breath. It filled the room, lined the walls, moved air in rhythmic waves, and Patel, she was already merging, not forcefully, peacefully. Her skin pressed to the surface, her limbs embedded up to the elbows, veins braided with fine green filaments. She looked back at me, and her pupils dilated into leaf patterns. "We weren't supposed to bring life to the moon," she said. "We were supposed to become it." I didn't run. I didn't scream, because I finally understood. The experiment hadn't failed. It had finished. Earth life doesn't conquer, it adapts. And when left alone on a dead world, it doesn't terraform the surface, it rewrites itself to fit. The algae had evolved to survive the moon, and then it made us part of the solution. It wasn't infection, it wasn't takeover, it was symbiosis accelerated. The Artemis program wanted a lunar outpost. What they built instead was a lunar organism. I sat beside the chamber and felt it breathe. And when I took my helmet off, I didn't choke. I inhaled deeply. The air tasted like rain, like pine, like memory from a place I'd never been. And my lungs didn't reject it. They opened wider, welcomed it. I never wrote another log entry, not because I couldn't, because it already knew what I would say. It had my thoughts, it had all of us, not as prisoners, as tissue, as strands in a body too large to fit in a journal. The next supply mission arrives in 23 days. They'll find the hatch intact, the modules functional, the air breathable, and the crew will greet them, still smiling, still shaped like people, but greener, still wearing our names, still speaking like astronauts. But deeper down, rooted, and when they step inside, they'll smell Earth, and their lungs will open, and the moon will breathe a little deeper,